Now, when you put this all together in your head, at some point with the political climate the way it was and what happened in the last 18 months, did you like sit there, look in the mirror and go, wait till they get a load of this?
Yeah. Yeah, it was like that.
Hello, happy Black History Month, everyone. We got Meg Thee Stallion making history on the charts with Hiss. Victoria Monet just won her first 3 Grammys. That ugly country singer who had a pro-lynching song just died, rot in piss. I mean, way to start the celebrations off with a bang, you guys. Great job. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about Jordan Peele's Get Out. If this video feels 7 years late to you, I promise you it's not. This movie has kind of been more relevant than ever recently, and I'll prove my point soon. Lately, I've been doing deep dives of horror movies that I consider to be masterpieces, and today is no exception. I'll get into the history of Jordan Peele's career leading up to Get Out, and then we'll talk about scripting and development. We'll talk about casting and how they got this wonderful crew together. Then I want to break down all our favorite scenes, the garden party, the sunken place, how Chris became our new favorite final boy. Then we'll get into the reception of the film and why it's still so relevant today. If that all sounds good to you, sit back, grab a snack. But before we dive right in, I am gonna do a weird white person thing, and I'm gonna invite you to join my online virtual cult. All you have to do is click subscribe, easy as that. I know it might sound weird, but maybe if you knew that I was the daughter of Satan, the Antichrist herself, it would make more sense. And click the like button and the notification bell, that way you never miss our next meeting. Now, you know who Jordan Peele is, you probably know his history, but for any super newbies out there, let me just quickly break it down. He got his start acting and writing for Mad TV back in 2003. He mostly stuck with acting until Key and Peele came along in 2012. This was his most well-known project up until Get Out, and it mostly just involved sketch comedy with his partner Keegan-Michael Key. It was while he was working on Key and Peele that he started to develop the Get Out script.
I wasn't involved in any of the writing, but he sent me the script, and I came into the office the next day and I put the script on his desk. I went, ooh, I said, this could be something. And then I went and talked to a good friend of mine, Sean McKittrick. I made a movie with Sean McKittrick from QC Entertainment, who made it, and they said, you guys should really read Jordan's scripts. And then now here we are.
Peele started talking about his idea with McKittrick in the summer of 2013. Jason Blum, head of Blumhouse Productions, the indie studio behind the Purge movies, got involved as soon as he heard about it. McKittrick said, I was shooting a movie with Keegan-Michael Key. He said, you gotta meet Jordan, he's a horror fanatic, and he has all these ideas. Jordan and I met for coffee in New Orleans. He said, here's one you'll ever want to make, and he pitched me the whole story. I'd never seen that movie before, it fascinated me, so I said right at the table, okay, I'm gonna buy this pitch and pay you to write it. I think he was a little shocked. Peele said I got a draft done in 2 months. There were years before that of just conceiving the movie. By the time I sat down and actually started writing, I already knew every scene. Halfway through writing it, I realized that I had to direct it. I think I got up to the party scene and I was like, who else is gonna do this? I've seen so few horror movies where a black person has been given the director's chair that I realized, why not me? I know this thing. I had no idea that Keegan-Michael Key was sort of the instigator for Get Out being possible, but I love that. Then in the throes of development, Jordan Peele credits 2 movies above all else as his inspiration: Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives. What those 2 movies have in common is that the story for both was done by Ira Levin. What Jordan latched onto specifically with his writing was how he crafted suspense.
This whole movie was made to address the black need for characters in horror movies to do the right thing, to avoid danger. I don't know if you ever watched a horror movie in a black neighborhood, but it gets loud. Black people are like, come on, get out the house, you know. Call the cops. No, don't walk backwards, motherfucker, don't do it. And so I wanted to make a movie that was for that audience, and I knew I had to if I was going to have a black protagonist in this movie. The character's actions have to pass the African American smell test. You know, it has to, or else you're just done. And so what I realized was what Ira Levin did with Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives is he wove these very social thrillers. He built them so subtly, the main character couldn't quite tell if something really dark and horrendous was happening, or if this was just garden variety, average social weirdness.
We'll break down how in some of these scenes you just have the gut feeling that something is wrong, but how much of that is valid versus how much of it is just white people being white people. So you never feel like Chris is being frustrating. There's never quite a valid reason to get out until there actually is. But more on that later. Let's talk about the actors that made this so real and how they were cast. I'm really only going to be talking about how Allison Williams and Daniel Kaluuya were cast because the whole movie hinges on those two, and otherwise we'd be here all day. Peele saw Allison as Marnie in Girls, and he felt that she was such a naturalistic performer, and that's what he was looking for that sort of first version of Rose. He also saw her in Peter Pan Live, which, wow, I did not know that was a thing. She recalls geeking out when she learned that he was interested in her for the role, and she accepted immediately after getting the script. Believe it or not, Get Out was her first movie. Could you imagine? Basically, when they met, they FaceTimed for 2 hours, they talked about the script, and he told her that he wanted to cast Daniel as well, and she became even more excited because she's a fan of his too. But she says that from the very beginning of the conversation, she was like, I'm doing this, but Jordan seemed to keep trying to entice her to bring her on, and she's like, no, I'm doing this. According to Peele, the way that these actors work, Allison is very precise, she's very type A, really likes exact direction. Daniel is much less precise, he operates more based on emotion. And for him, it was a no-brainer as well. He was discovered by Peele in his episode of Black Mirror. It seems like when the Get Out script came across his desk, it totally shifted his perception of what was possible in his career.
And it's basically T'Challa's getting it's the coronation, and then everyone starts singing, like hundreds of extras start singing and drumming, and I just got chills. Like my inner child was like, oh my God, if I saw this as a kid, I wouldn't feel such like a weirdo. Or like, you feel weird when you grow up. There's nothing that looks like you on TV.
No, yeah, I say no a lot. I said no,
Yeah, we say no
a lot to scripts. I felt really bad. I felt really bad saying no to all these scripts. And then I was like, oh, is something wrong with me? Am I just not? And then Jordan's script came and I was like, yep. And I was like, oh, I'm not the problem here. It's just stuff doesn't speak to me.
He's like, yo, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. This is a movie my friends and I have been asking for forever.
I can only imagine the disillusionment of going, oh, it is actually possible to see myself in a script. I'm not weird. And then it happened to him in his mid-20s. There's just a lot of little luxuries like that I feel like white people take for granted every single day. So many of those little micro privileges are things that I feel like people didn't even consider before seeing Get Out, and how many microaggressions we see in that movie. So let's break this movie down. There's a lot to get into. Usually I devote an entire section just to the themes of the movie when I do a deep dive. See my deep dive of Ginger Snaps, of An American Werewolf in London. This time we're basically breaking down all the major scenes as they pertain to theme, because this movie is just one big social commentary. We're gonna start with the very opening of the movie because I want to talk about the score. I had certainly never heard anything like that before, and much like everything else in this movie, that was intentional. He sought out a black composer because he just instinctually knew that a black composer would know exactly what he needed. Luckily, he found Michael Abels, and maybe you already know that he went on to score Us and Nope for Peele as well. Peele heard his piece called Urban Legends and then sent Abels the script, and then, much like everyone else, immediately after reading it, he wanted to be on the project.
I don't want voodoo shit, because I've heard that. I want something else. I want the soundtrack to be this combination between that and, Bernard Herrmann, who, of course, Alfred Hitchcock's guy. So I was pushing for the sound of the movie to be the coagula itself, to be this abomination of white and black.
The language in the score is actually Swahili, and roughly translated, the lines in it are saying things like, listen to your elders, run for your life. Good advice for Chris on this one. I also love how the score is used to subvert the traditional perspective, which Michael Abels talked about in this interview. So there's scenes that have funny lines, especially in the garden party, where people are saying awkward things to Chris, and they aren't really aware of how they're coming off. When you watch those things as an audience, you laugh, but from Chris's perspective, it's not funny, it's awkward and he feels tense. So the music, rather than being satirical or funny, takes on his point of view. It's sort of like if you've heard that one Jordan Peele quote where he says that the difference between a comedy and a horror movie is the music. This is exactly what he's talking about. But moving on, the next scene that I want to tackle is when the cop shows up. He's asking questions. Of course, he asks for Chris's ID, and Rose sticks up for him, like, no, that's bullshit. He has nothing to do with this.
What you need to see my ID for?
Yeah, like...
That's the same energy.
Yeah.
What you need to see my
Yeah.
ID for? I don't even feel like going down that road.
Yeah.
Here you go. But then you start to think about it as that happens over and over time. you start to feel like you in the sunken place.
On the first watch, especially, Jordan Peele wants you to feel like, okay, this is the interracial couple that's going to conquer all. He's also playing off the white savior trope, which we will get into that later. What I love is how you can view this scene on your second viewing once you know how evil she is. She's not sticking up for him because she cares. She's sticking up for him because she doesn't want there to be any kind of paper trail with Chris. At least not before he assumes his new identity. Unfortunately, on the second viewing, I don't know. I feel like it kind of creates a little bit of a plot hole because the officer has a line of dialogue, I think at the top of the scene, where he's saying, just for future reference, the person you call is animal control, not the police.
So in the future, the number to call is Animal Control Services.
Sorry about that. It's just disoriented.
So Rose or Chris called the police? That just doesn't make sense in any world. I'm assuming it was Rose. Chris would never want to call the police for anything. And if Rose is playing her part right, she wouldn't have called them either because she's trying not to leave a trail. It's just that you know she's done this with a bajillion other black people, and so wouldn't she know by this point, like, not to call the cops and leave a trail? Whatever. Also, if she's playing her part right, wouldn't Chris have said something like, oh no, please don't call the police, especially not where we are? So it would not only be for her own sake not to leave a trail, but for Chris's sake as well. And if she's still playing loving girlfriend, she wouldn't have called you know what? Anyway, of course, meeting the family is weird. Let's talk briefly about this dinner scene. Fun fact, while shooting this, because it took an entire day and they had to be laughing at the top, after a while, they weren't really laughing anymore. Everyone was pretty tired. So Jordan Peele started directing them using his Barack Obama impression. How fun. What I really want to unpack, though, is the scene immediately following that.
What is his problem? He's never treated any of my boyfriends that way. Ever, ever, ever.
Rose discovering racism is so fascinating to me, as is the development of this scene.
And there's a scene between Chris and Rose. And in the original script, Chris was like, see, I told you, it's making me uncomfortable. I don't want to be here. This is what I was afraid of. You didn't see it, and now you're... And she was kind of like pacifying him. She was like, look, no, I know my family, I see it now. They're a little bit clumsy and they're a little bit like say the wrong thing, but they really mean well and just give us a chance. Do this for me, baby. Watching them in rehearsal, I was like, oh no. I'm onto her. So we flipped it. And that's where her sort of awakening, kind of came from.
This was so smart. The way that he figured out how to hold his cards, I'm in awe. She's having the disillusionment that her family is no better than the masses. Well, she's pretending, but you know what I mean. And on the flip side, Chris is then the one that has to comfort her and be like, yeah, this is pretty much normal. I kind of told you so. It's also brilliant in that it keeps us on Chris's side. Everything has been par for the course. Very uncomfortable, obviously, because he's experiencing these microaggressions, but unfortunately, par for the course. It's so much more interesting to me when a filmmaker knows how to hold their cards and you're just as in the know as the main character. It's not as fun being ahead of them, and I know that dramatic irony has its place, but I find this far more suspenseful. And again, he's playing into the white savior trope, but more on that later. Now we have to talk about one of the most important scenes of the movie, in my opinion, the garden party.
Well, I can't quite swing the hips like I used to, though. But, I do know Tiger.
That's great.
Every interaction he has involves these white people recognizing him for the color of his skin before anything else.
What you're trying to do as a white individual is basically make someone feel welcome, but how it's received is that I feel isolated.
Yeah,
and I feel
exactly.
pushed away. So it's that kind of like, and that party scene was one of the reasons why I had to say yes to this.
Yeah, me
because
too.
it
That
was
was one of
like,
my favorite scenes.
oh, I've been there so many times, and the people that do that are lovely. They're really nice people, but you're like, but you feel awkward, and you're like, oh, I'm just living my life. I don't really see him. I just live, and you're being constantly like, oh, what's it like? Oh, this. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about what's happened in Botswana.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I find this to be the best example of why discussions about race are so important, because even the most well-meaning interactions can still contain pretty severe microaggressions. And I'm sure that nearly everyone watching has had that experience to some sort of variation. Peele also talks about how he's been to gatherings like that, and I have to wonder what his wife's family thinks of the movie. Anyway, moving on to arguably the most iconic metaphor of the 21st century, the sunken place.
Sink into the floor.
Wait.
Sink.
Now, the setup for the hypnotism scene was tricky because Peele says that he had to maintain the black audience. So Chris couldn't just sit down and be like, okay, yay, let me get hypnotized. Fun fact, Catherine Keener also got hypnotized herself to prepare for the role, and the biggest thing that she learned was that the subject has to feel at ease. Peele utilized the most comforting character of the movie, Missy to kind of lure him in and get him talking. That way he'd get hypnotized without really knowing it, and then thus falling into the sunken place. The first inspiration for that scene was how you feel like you're falling when you're falling asleep and then you get startled awake. He thought, well, what if you didn't wake up from that? From there, it obviously grew to mean something so much more.
And I started thinking about the experience of being black in a movie theater and not having our voice represented, not having our skin, our sort of idea. And you yell at the screen, "Don't walk backwards, mother." And they, they still do. And so the connection of this lack of agency, this connection between the lack of voices, at that point I realized the sunken place was this symbol for the system that keeps us down. I originally felt like it was black people, but I feel I've had many people, women, many people of all different races tell me they've felt that. I honor that now, that this is a feeling of the voiceless.
I felt connected to that, not in terms of race, but certainly for my gender. I've talked about my terrible first experiences on film sets, just constantly being surrounded by like older men. Like I was 19, totally inexperienced, powerless, surrounded by 40-somethings that were flirting with me, but it relates to just existing as a woman too. I was actually speaking about this with my boyfriend recently because, for context, he hasn't really dated that much before we got together, so naturally he has a lot to learn about the feminine experience, and I was asking him if he has ever taken notice of how men look at me when we're walking around together.
Why are these men looking at me?
Yeah, they're also staring at me. I feel what can only be described as admired, but not ogled, and there's no undertone of violence.
Mine very much has an undertone of violence.
He was like, yeah, it's weird, I do notice. So I was like, yep, now you've had just a little taste of the feminine experience. Imagine how tired we are. Speaking of, the next character that I want to talk about is Georgina, who I think best represents the pain of black, female, queer assimilation. Assimilation is a huge theme of this movie, and I specifically want to talk about this tier. Also, I know I'm calling her Georgina, which was the grandmother's name, but we never learn who her character actually was. It's so tragic because she has the strongest will of anyone that's been sunken, and we never get to meet her. She comes through without even having a flashlight. I mean, incredible.
Her being in a relationship with a woman, I would imagine that that's got a lot of, I don't want to say baggage, but like a lot of things in which she had to suppress, and she had to conform as much as she could.
The question they're asserting here is something that really challenged the narrative of what racism is. What if it wasn't always overt and obvious? What if it was admiration and assimilation, the obsession with black bodies? One is violent, but they're two sides of the same coin. In the Nice and Neat podcast that I've been playing throughout this, they talk about something called negrophilia. According to them, it originated in France. I need to look into it a little bit more. To boil it down, it's all about the obsession with not only black culture, but black people as well. It did originate in Paris, where people would collect tribal art and things like that, and then it just has continued to escalate. I'd recommend pausing to read this more thorough explanation of what it is, because it also talks about how it relates to this in the modern age, especially as it pertains to cultural appropriation, but I do get into that very shortly in this video as well. So Peele took the non-violent, appreciative side and took it about as far as you could go. I think the running scene with the grandpa especially relates to this too. There's the whole origin story of why their family started doing this procedure, and it was because the grandpa lost to a black guy in a race. So he went full Nazi and was just like, well, it must be because black people have some sort of biological advantage. And now he runs all night long in his new body just trying to beat the time. What a freak. I feel that this in particular has never been more relevant because of the current trans panic in the United States. I saw this TikTok a while back of this girl that was just doing like her regular track training, and this white dude came up and like challenged her to a 400 race.
I just ran the first 200 meters with him. I just stayed with him. I'm not exerting myself for no reason. I have nothing to prove here. And then since he does not run at all, his lack of fitness really hit him hard after 200 meters. And I was like, okay, let me just go now. And then, as you should always do, I finish hard because that's what you do as a track runner. And then Yeah, so the gap was widening.
He's not even an athlete. I cannot stress this to you enough. He is not an athlete. That is the end game of the trans people in sports panic. Men thinking that they are genetically superior just by virtue of having testosterone in their bodies. It is full-blown delusion. This is why movies with messages like Get Out are so important, because yes, it seems explicitly about race, but it is so relatable on just a purely human level. It's applicable to almost any minority group that has lost their agency or felt otherized in any kind of way. But let's circle back to the appreciation element of this nefarious plot and talk about the art dealer.
You know, I could give a shit what color you are. I want your eye, man.
That is an important scene in what you're talking about, in terms of the dehumanization of Chris, of assimilation, of taking the goods from the black artist and leaving the soul, or trapping the soul, or disregarding the humanity. That he is a guy who has the ultimate plausible deniability to his own racial feelings. He's blind. The system itself and society is the monster here.
This has happened since the dawn of time, maybe? Let's even just backpedal to the early 2000s, when Fergie was in her appropriation era, or 15 years ago when Miley was in her appropriation era, or 5 years ago when Kim Kardashian was in her appropriation era. Diana Ross is alive. Why was Kim Kardashian in blackface for this photo shoot? What is going on? I shouldn't have to explain to modern audiences why appropriation is bad, right? Maybe that's too big of an assumption for me to make, because appropriation is still so deeply ingrained within our culture. I remember that even all through high school, I remember there would be events where it's like, dress up like pilgrims and Indians, and those events were facilitated by our school. Like, appropriation was literally taught to us. So maybe you can't get there on your own, but that is not the focus of today's video. The point is that so much about art and culture has come from black people, but it gets swept under the rug. A lot of the credit gets taken by white people because, you guessed it, racism. Rock and roll wasn't marketable until Elvis stole it from black people. Rap didn't become marketable until Eminem was like, I am Slim Shady. I know we had Tupac, Will Smith, LL Cool J, all those guys in the 80s. But according to a quick Google search, for example, Tupac earned over 45 million in revenue from music sales. Will Smith earned about 10 million. Eminem has earned about 400 million. So those numbers tell a very clear story about who is seen as marketable, who was given more marketing and more opportunity. And please don't be dense. I'm not suggesting that Eminem's numbers weren't earned. I'm just trying to acknowledge that white people tend to benefit from black culture more than black people do. Now, to pivot all the way back to Rose. Do you got those keys, Rose?
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
Sometimes all white people are evil. Walk with me. Peele wanted to flip the trope of the white savior. There was not a movie that existed where there wasn't at least one good white person in it. And if you're unfamiliar with the trope, think of The Help, Emma Stone.
The white savior that always exists in a movie about race. The character that is there to say to the audience, to say to the white audience member, really, it's okay, this is you, right? It's Brad Pitt in 12 Years a Slave, right? It's like, don't worry, not all white people are evil. It's Costner in Hidden Figures, right? That's me. I'm not one of the racist ones.
It's a trope that exists because of white fragility, honestly. Because apparently, even though black people have to experience all forms of racism, violent, non-violent, apparently we have trouble even just talking about it. Peele really used that trope to his advantage with how Rose was framed in the first act of the movie. The moment on the stairs is this really do or die moment where I'm sure that most white people in the audience were still thinking it could go either way.
That's my favorite moment in an audience, because that's when you could feel, specifically black people, you could feel them being like, yup, sometimes all white people are evil. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes it does happen though.
This in particular resonates because I don't think that up until recently people understood just how touched by systemic racism we all are. It does not matter how well-intentioned you are, you have a cognitive bias that you'll have to unlearn for the rest of your life.
I've noticed a lot of times when anybody who's not black speaks about black people, they want to reassure you that this is I'm speaking about it in a positive way, right? It's almost like saying like, oh man, I love black people. I have black friends.
Yeah.
Even black people have internalized stuff that they need to work out. That's why we have figures in the world like Candace Owens, who is trying to be one of the good ones. The last scene that I want to touch on is when Rod shows up and your heart just sinks. I mean, if you know anything about the context of police relations with black people in America, your heart sinks. In the original ending, Chris was gonna go to prison because Jordan Peele just wanted it to be more realistic. But then after test audiences and him kind of having a change of heart, he wanted to give Chris a happy ending. Before we move on to reception, there is actually one really interesting deleted scene that I want to go over. They shot more scenes of the sunken place and had a very strange visual here of the skeleton of a deer that it sort of attacked him. I don't know, it's a little unclear. The deer was a bit of imagery that never fully resonated with me, but I've come to understand it more after doing my research. Basically, when they hit the deer, that's supposed to signal that it has unlocked Chris's memory of losing his mother. It also relates to why he ended up saving Georgina at the end, even though he's screaming at himself, no, no, no. In that moment, whether he knows it or not, he was kind of trying to get over the trauma of his inaction losing his mother, and so this time he actually wanted to do something and help her. But I'm glad they cut out the deer scene in the sunken place because I feel like it would have made the sunken place a little bit less impactful. I get that they're trying to imply that while you're in there, you're sort of being attacked by all the most uncomfortable parts of your subconscious and you have no control, obviously. But when you see too much of a monster on screen, it starts to lose its bite. It's why you pretty much never see the shark in Jaws. It's why you don't see the alien until the very end. I just think if there was too much of the sunken place, we might have become a little bit desensitized. I like how much it is in the movie just as it is. That about covers my breakdown of the most iconic scenes. I realize there is still a lot to get into, but this is a general deep dive and not a plot breakdown. I just wanted to hit on some of my favorite moments. Let's get into the reception of this movie, the current climate at the time of its release, and its historical impact.
This was coming from a lot of the same place that, you know, while we wrote the Obama anger translator sketch, you know, where it felt like he had to hold his tongue a little bit about the whole racial bullshit that was going on. He couldn't say it. It seemed like the angry black man. So we kind of translated. Well, with this movie, there was a similar sense of like in that time when Obama was president, this feeling of like, oh, don't talk about race. If you talk about it, it will come. Like Field of Dreams or some shit.
We're done. We have a black president. We're good.
Yeah, we're good.
We're
past
done now.
race.
We're past it.
So this film was like about pointing out why we're not past race and starting with these little subtler interactions that people will recognize.
One might think the movie had been inspired by the Trump administration because the conversation about race was very loud at that time and not in a good way. But it was actually the opposite, and then the movie just happened to be released at what we thought at the time would be the most tumultuous political point of our country's history. Boy, have things gone downhill, but it just sort of ended up being this kismet thing of when it was released. And it probably would have still been regardless for its historical representation. If you look at most timelines of black cinema history, there's often like a 20-year jump between Eve's Bayou and Get Out. Before then, there were huge jumps as well, with only a handful of what are considered iconic films directed by black filmmakers. That obviously doesn't cover the full history, but it's very telling that there's only like these 10 movies that are household names throughout history, and I would argue that most of those aren't even on that level. Get Out was also, as far as I can tell, the first movie of all of those to explicitly address racism. No allegory, just full-on explicit conversations about race at the center of it all. Of course, we have the metaphor of the sunken place and whatnot, but you know what I mean. I'll show you a few more moments from the press circuit here that I think demonstrate my point.
It's meant to bring us together. I know the movie seems like it's a divisive premise. As an experience, I don't think it is. I think everybody takes what they bring into it and views it through that prism or that lens, but at the end of the day, we're all Chris. It's a great starting point for the conversation because it's like, okay, does that really happen? Yep, that really happens.
First, just thank you for making this film. I and some other black film students I know didn't think a film like this was possible. So thank you for opening up that world of possibilities.
Thank you.
Honestly.
Thank you. I didn't either. I didn't think it was possible either, so Thank you.
It was truly a new thing because black voices in cinema have not been nurtured. Now, I always like to go over what the common folk thought of the movie before I get into the critical reception, but I typed in Get Out reviews and tell me why in all my scrolling I was looking at white faces reviewing this movie. You have a woman peppered in every now and then, but it's mostly just cishet white dudes. And I don't know why, because that's not the kind of content that I watch. Cishet male perspectives rarely interest me. I'm not sorry, that's just how it is. So tell me why my algorithm works this way. Once again, one of those micro privileges that people take for granted. Like, even when it comes to representation on YouTube, even I'm frustrated. I'm like, why am I only looking at straight, cisgendered white men with beards? No offense, Cody Leach. I love you. Mwah. I actually do watch his videos. Anyway, I had to specifically type in black person reviews Get Out to find literally any black people talking about this movie. Anyway, most of them could not argue with the consensus. They all loved the movie, but my favorite review that I watched came out just last year, actually, during Black History Month in 2023. It's from the Nice and Neat podcast, which I've been playing clips of throughout this whole video.
I've been waiting for this all week. I'm excited. I'm happy that this movie is by us and it's for us because it is that damn good. I'm really excited. Do you guys remember when we were watching and we had to pause it for a second and we was just like, yo, this is good.
Yeah.
This is good.
This good film right here.
They're so succinct and their perspective is obviously like more valuable than mine is here. I just wanted to mention that podcast again at the bottom of this video because I really think that you should watch the entire thing. I always have a master resource post listed in the description boxes of all my deep dives, so that is there for you. Go check it out. All of the reviews that I watched, people were loving it at the time. I mean, the word of mouth, everybody knew about this movie. I'm sure that most of you were there because this movie is not very old, so I'm not going to get too deeply into that. Let's move on to the critical response, because for a hot minute there, it was rated at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's only dipped down to a 98% as of right now. This was also the first horror movie in years to get nominated at the Oscars. It was the first horror movie since Silence of the Lambs to be nominated for Best Picture. It was also nominated for Best Director, Best Actor for Daniel Kaluuya, as well as Best Original Screenplay. And unfortunately, it only won for Best Original Screenplay. I will never forgive the Academy for voting for The Shape of Water for Best Picture over Get Out. Can we be a little more serious? Like, the reason why I wanted to bring this movie back into conversation today is because, number one, I think the conversations that it brings up are always going to be relevant. But number two, we remember the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020. The conversation was especially at the top of our consciousness then, and I thought that it would continue. But seeing how things have somewhat reverted back since then, I can't honestly say that I'm surprised, but all these companies at that time were putting on the performance of a lifetime, especially streaming sites. So riddle me this. Let's go through this thread of black-led shows that have been canceled within the last few months. Rap Shit on Max, which is produced by Issa Rae. Stars has canceled Blind Spotting and Run the World. Apple TV has canceled Swagger and Truth Be Told. Southside and A Black Lady Sketch have been canceled on Max. Z-Way on Showtime has been canceled. The Game on Paramount Plus. Kindred on FX, The Wonder Year on ABC, Grand Crew on NBC, Riches on Prime, Saturdays on Disney Channel. Ooh, take a breath, take a breath. What happened to the plot? I thought that it was, we love black voices. We have a whole tab on the front page of our site dedicated to black stories. So why are they all getting canceled now? Oh, it was all performative? For sure, for sure. I guess I'm just here to say that you're not fucking slick. ABC, Apple TV, Hulu, Disney, and also your CEOs are going to hell. So here are a few more quotes from Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele that I really just want producers to open their ears for.
There's this mythology in the industry that has been around for years, which is but black stars in movies, they don't work over, it doesn't travel overseas. So what are you gonna do? Got to make money. It's a business. And it's bullshit. Great content works. Great story works. It doesn't matter where it's getting. If it's good, and people will respond. Many artists get stopped before they even begin.
If you're a producer, if you're a white male producer, and you don't understand the story, that's why you should make it. If you take a deep breath, it will resonate with you as a human. Doesn't matter if it's a black woman or a Hispanic gay man. It doesn't matter. Let that human story be told.
That's it. That's the thesis. Stop canceling black stories. stories, start celebrating them for real, rewatch Get Out, because apparently a lot of you need to. Not you guys, not my audience, but you know who I'm talking about. And this is a layered issue. We just had that huge wave of strikes. There's so many other issues going on. Let black people, brown people, Asian people, let them in the rooms where decisions are made, because clearly y'all do not know what the fuck audiences want to see. Coyote vs. Acme, how do you say that? And Batgirl, those got shelved and deleted, but we still got Madam Web in theaters. What are we doing? I'm gonna sign off before this just becomes the ramblings of a mentally ill person. But before I go, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to check out the other content that I have on this channel. Like I mentioned, I've been releasing other deep dives lately. On my second channel, I go on spooky outings, and I also talk about physical media. That's something that I am very passionate about. And I have a Patreon where I post a third bonus weekly video as well. Check out my social media too if you fancy. I'm pretty much everywhere, but more than anything, I just hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Bye!